Yeah, I'm doing my PhD in social anthropology at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. And I'm doing research in Kyrgyzstan on organic farming, which I will say a bit more about today as well. But yeah, I started the research in 2021 already, so I'm now kind of writing up, but also still have a lot of writing to do. So I'm not really finished yet.
Maybe we start so that we don't translate afterwards, and then people will just connect, and just go with the flow.
Sounds good.
So thank you everyone for being here today. I'm the introducer of the day. Today we are welcoming Simone de Boer for our seminar. It's the 5th session that we are organizing. Simone, as she just said, is a PhD student at the School of Global Studies in Gothenburg University. And she will first present her research, and then she will be discussed briefly by Irène Mestre, geographer at IFEAC, who is online with us today. And then we will open the discussion to the audience. Both reading, if you cannot speak, you can write your questions, and we will read them out loud. If there is no question, thank you for being here today. Thank you, Simone, for being here today. And the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. And thank you also, Agathe, Irène, and Alia for organizing, of course, and for inviting me. And also Irène for being a discussant. And of course, the rest of you for attending. Can you actually see my slide? Is it still sharing or not? Okay.
No, we don't see your slide.
Okay. I shared before, but then I think it disappeared. Let me see. I think now it should share, right?
Yes, perfect.
Okay,
yeah,
great. So what I will present today is part of a paper that is that I've submitted to a journal and that's now under review. So I'll also be very happy for your comments and questions so I can improve it when I get the paper back. So as the title suggests, is my slide moving? Was my slide moving or not?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay, great. So as my title suggests, today I will talk about vermicompost, or biohumus, or biogumus, as is more generally known in Kyrgyzstan. So I don't know if you're familiar with it, but just to quickly explain, vermicompost is a type of compost or composting in which people purposefully add a specific species of earthworms to their compost heaps to get this kind of special earthworm compost. So on this picture, you can also see the worms in the middle. And the reason for doing this is that the worms will digest the compost materials, and then through their digestive system, they will kind of add beneficial elements to the compost that benefits the health of plants, and it gives nutrients to plants. And it also reduces harmful contaminants that could be part of compost materials. So it is actually kind of the worm casting, so the worm poop, that is interesting for vermicomposters. So and then when this compost is applied to the soil, it improves the soil by improving kind of the aeration in it, and also the capacity of the soil to retain moisture. And then, like I said, it increases nutrients and the presence of soil organisms, like microorganisms, bacteria, that are beneficial for soil life. So together, all of these things contribute to soil's overall health, fertility, productivity, which is also the reason why it is so interesting for
recording is on
oriented farmers. And another advantage is that it is quite easy and accessible and cheap to do. So you can do it at home and also mostly use like waste materials. So it doesn't really cost any money to do it. So I became interested in this practice of vermicomposting in Kyrgyzstan specifically when I conducted my fieldwork for my PhD in 2022. And then, so the focus of my research is not composting per se, but I focus more broadly on organic food production and permaculture farming, mostly among smallholder farmers, and also mostly in the context of NGO or donor-funded projects. So I don't know if you're all familiar with permaculture, but just very briefly, this is kind of an holistic approach to farming aimed at designing and maintaining agricultural productive ecosystems which resemble natural ecosystems. So it's not only about agricultural output, but also about kind of nurturing ecosystems. So what happens during my fieldwork is that I was kind of following the activities of these projects and NGOs, talking to participants, and then I noticed that composting was a very central feature in how people understood what kind of organic and permaculture farming was and why it was good and useful. But more importantly than kind of being a key feature, I was struck by people's enthusiasm about biohumus or vermicompost, and also very touched by kind of the care that they put into raising compost worms and engaging with compost, and also the community building that happened around it. So two female smallholder farmers who participated in the project, they shared, they were talking about biohumus, kind of sharing their enthusiasm, and they even went so far as to say that one said biohumus is what we really need in our lives, and then another woman said biohumus is the secret to everything. So I think this kind of summarizes people's enthusiasm. So what I'll do in this presentation is kind of explain why these people, but also other people, were so enthusiastic about this kind of composting, and also how we can see their enthusiasm in relation to notions of resourcelessness and resourcefullerness in Kyrgyzstan today. Before I do so, however, I will say a few words more about the context and background of my research, and also of the research participants, which are also participants in the project, usually. So geographically speaking, my research took place in Naren, Issyk, and Chui, also in Bishkek, because that's where some of the organizations and people in the organic movement are also located. So what I did is I followed multiple projects that focus on organic agriculture and permaculture, and kind of following their activities, talking to participants. So what these projects do is they promote organic or permaculture farming as a way to counter environmental degradation, but also, and I think maybe even more importantly, in their eyes, to improve smallholder farmers' livelihoods and people's health through healthy eating, and also livelihoods through subsistence farming and maybe getting an income from the surplus. So the participants were smallholder farmers who usually had a kitchen garden near their house and also often had a plot of land somewhere else, like near the village. Many also owned livestock, and some had salaried jobs, so quite a diverse, livelihoods picture. And most of them, not all of them, but most of them cultivated crops before, but it had not been very diverse. So mostly kind of staple crops like onion, potatoes, and fodder crops for their livestock. And in Issyk also people cultivated fruit, often like apricots, apples. In Naren was where I think the least variety in terms of crops was found before people started participating in the project. And that's mostly because the climate and environment is a bit harsher than Issyk and Chui. And also people have a more strong tradition of being involved in livestock herding that still continues until today because of these climatic and environmental reasons. And the reason why people were interested in participating in this projects in the first place is because they were interested in cultivating ecologically clean food for their families, for their kids, and also the possibility of earning additional income with this food production. They were also interested in acquiring new knowledge, access to technology, especially also to make the soil more productive, and in that way obtain more healthy and fresh fruits. And also in general, I noticed kind of more general sense of kind of infrastructural insufficiency, institutional insufficiency, resource insufficiency, and a hope of kind of filling some of these resource gaps that they experienced by participating in one of the projects. So here on this picture, you also see a garden of one of the participants. So to say a bit more about this kind of insufficiencies that people experienced, regarding crop cultivation specifically, irrigation, water, and soil were mentioned as obstacles to getting a good harvest. So most people in rural areas are dependent on queuing for irrigation water that is supplied through water channels that run through the village. So not everybody has their own kind of wells or own water harvesting systems. The problem is that they need to queue for it, and they often don't get more than once or twice per year or per growing season, which is often not enough to properly water their fields or the gardens. And another problem is that these channels are often not so well maintained, so they're often broken. They're also often still from the Soviet Union. So on the two bottom pictures here, you can see that the water is just flowing, but not through the channels. So it's also getting lost kind of on the way to the fields. Another water issue was is climate change, which kind of further increases water insecurity because glaciers are retreating. Also rain and snow patterns are changing. So this is making water availability more unpredictable and also can lead to seasonal scarcity. Related to soil, especially the land in high altitude areas, which, as you probably know, is most of Kyrgyzstan, right? But also semi-arid and arid regions, as you can also see on this picture on the top, were thought of by many people as holding little potential for abundant cultivation. So there was kind of a common view that this land can only yield harvest of limited quantity, quality, and diversity. So in this case, the soil was kind of deemed resourceless, at least for using it for agriculture. And also for Kyrgyzstan as a whole, there's a concern about growing scarcity of fertile land in the future, because agricultural soils are also increasingly degrading as a result of both current and past land use practices, but also climate change. So this is also set to put a risk on, or to put future food security at risk. And the last insufficiency that people mentioned or talked about is poor condition of roads, and also that some people live quite remote. So that means that some households experience difficulty accessing agricultural inputs, but also fresh, diverse, ecological, clean fruits and vegetables to kind of supplement their subsistence production. So especially people living more remotely were also very keen on increasing their own production, so they wouldn't be dependent on kind of difficult to reach producers and retailers. So I hope this has given a sufficient idea of the context. So now we can move on to the role of biohumus in all of this. So my first encounter with biohumus during my research coincided with the first time many of the participants in a project on permaculture were introduced to it. So this was really nice actually for me to be there at that time, so we could kind of learn together and be introduced together. So this happened, so there was a seminar in a demonstration garden of this project, where the participants were taught about different practices in permaculture and also about vermicomposting. So an agronomist who worked for this project, he came to teach a seminar, and then here you can see in the picture that they're all kind of standing around the compost heap that was already prepared in I'm not sure how long actually, weeks, months, years maybe, before. But then now this agronomist, so the man in the center, he explained to the people kind of what kind of materials to add, how to layer them, how to take care of the worms. So they also in the seminar added some kitchen waste, some garden waste, some cardboard, and also manure was already on there, I think. And then after he had told them that and added the materials, he also added actual worms that he had brought from his own heap. So he had transported a cardboard box with the worms and added them to the heap to show like how you do it and how you make sure they have kind of an easy landing in this heap. So after the seminar was over, some people started composting at home. Some had already started before because they had another different seminar previously. And then some people only were involved in this demonstration garden. Mostly this was done by women, the taking care of compost. And I think this is because the compost heap is usually in the garden close to the house. And women are usually responsible for this kind of garden work that's close to the house. So I think that's kind of a logical consequence of that. So like I already said, the materials people used were usually for free. So waste materials from the garden, from the kitchen, wool as well. And then, yeah, the worms, of course, you have to get from somewhere as well. So sometimes people bought them, but they also often got them from like friends or relatives. So also often for free. So part of the reason why I think biohumus was embraced by project participants is because it turned this experience of insufficiency of resources into experience of sufficiency of resources, and sometimes even abundance. So the first way in which this is happening is because of this use of waste materials. So people came to see kind of potential in materials that were largely being discarded or wasted before. So one of the women who took up composting, she mentioned that she developed a habit of collecting banana peels on the streets. And she said, like, I even tell my grandchildren to not throw them away, the banana peels, but to give them to the worms instead. She also started taking cardboard boxes home from the shops. And her friend who was sitting there when we were having this conversation, she also said that, we used to burn cardboard and now we are collecting it. So through composting, these materials that were usually burned or discarded, they become actually kind of sought after, and people started to take them home from the streets or the shops. This also happened to wool, which is often thrown away as trash or burned or just left when the sheep are shorn, because this kind of wool of the Kyrgyz sheep is not so good for selling because it's very coarse. But now people found a way to actually use it in their compost heaps. Like I said, they also use manure, which is widely available because many people have livestock. They already used manure before as a fertilizer, but now by adding it to this compost heap and through this digestion by worms, it actually gets more nutritional value. So it's also appreciated more. And also, as you can see on this picture, the bottom pictures, people use like old carpets, old felt from utes, old roof plates to also construct the compost bins. So not only organic waste materials, but also these other materials that were used to build compost heaps or to kind of cover it as a protection against cold or against birds or against moisture evaporation. So through this talking with enthusiastic composters, I realized that by coming to see potential in these waste materials, people also started to look differently at their environment. So instead of taking scarcity or deficiency as a starting point and also as a limitation, being involved in vermicomposting invited people to actually see kind of research potential and to envision and experience certain types of sufficiency and abundance. So instead of thinking about what was lacking, people started to think about what is available to work with and what they do have instead of what they do not have. And I noticed that this was even more the case when people also experienced the effects of biohumus on their gardens. So kind of the first step was assembling this heap and seeing compost being made. And then when they added it to their gardens, they also noted how biohumus increased their yields. It made the crops grow faster and also ripen earlier. And that in turn made it easier or made it possible to harvest earlier, have a longer growing season, be able to grow more different kinds of crops. Also crops that they weren't used to growing before because they thought like the growing season would be too short. So they also got access to fresh vegetables from their own garden, and also vegetables they wouldn't usually buy because they weren't really used to cooking with them. And also many people said that the harvest from their garden tasted much better than the things they would buy from the shop, which were often a bit dry and kind of empty tasting, people said. And instead from their garden, it tasted kind of rich and clean and fresh and healthy. People also noticed that the soil structure improved. So it made it also easier to work the soil, like less strenuous, I guess, like because it's less compacted and less heavy. It also improved moisture retention. So they needed to water less, or they needed less water for irrigation. So in a way, this also mitigated the experience of scarcity of irrigation water, but also lack of machinery for cultivation, lack of fresh vegetables, and about the lack of fertile soil in general, of course. And also people, because of these changes, people started to think differently about their land and the potential of their land. So they realized that first they thought that what they first thought was kind of worthless soil or even a wasteland sometimes could be turned into a thriving field. And also as a result, that some of the things they thought were impossible were actually within reach. So one woman said, with the help of biohumus, you can plant anything. So this experience of seeing their gardens come to life, become more productive, also helped people rethink some of the livelihoods limitations they experienced, and to anticipate the thriving of their soil, but also of their families. So this made me realize that people's enthusiasm for biohumus was not only about kind of the wonders of turning waste materials into a valuable resource, but also with a sense of potentiality and sufficiency. So where they sometimes feel abandoned by the government and to some extent feel resourceless, composting enabled them to feel instead resourceful, or at least resourcefuller. So here with the term resourceful, I refer to kind of three interrelated processes. So first, people employ creativity by making do with whatever is at hand in composting, I mean. They also utilize this kind of creativity and capacity to create or access material and non-material resources. And then third, by doing this, they also address resource inequalities by engaging with or changing the local resource base and the way these resources are used. And on top of that, I think also resource making has a cyclical and reproductive component, at least in the case of composting, because increased cultivation also leads to more garden waste, which can then be used for composting or fed to livestock, and then livestock manure is used for composting. Also, when worms are well cared for, they multiply. They can multiply quite rapidly. So they are able to process more organic waste and create more biohumus, and also by becoming abundant worms become shareable and sellable, which means more people can become involved in composting, and also people can earn an income sometimes when they sell it. An important thing here to notice that this process of becoming resourceful extends beyond the individual household, because people tend to share their surplus with their social networks. Sometimes also they donate it to charity, also often as a part of kind of religious reasons, or they set it locally. So then they increase the local availability of this clean food, organic fertilizer, and organic plants and seeds, in addition to earning an income and kind of increasing their moral social capital. So this means that this resourcefulness kind of circulates through more than monetary forms of exchange, as they are part of reciprocal and mutual relationships, which are in general important in Kyrgyz society. So self-sufficiency here is also kind of social sufficiency. So it's not only about the self, but about the wider community. Also, sharing is one of the main principles of permaculture, actually. So it also connects well to this more cultural notions in Kyrgyzstan, or cultural importance of sharing. I guess this all sounds kind of quite great and magical in a sense. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that even though composting is cheap and accessible and relatively easy, it is not effortless. So it also needs work. So humans need to invest time, energy, and effort in creating, first of all, a suitable space for the compost heap, to assemble all the materials, to prepare the materials. They need to turn the heap now and then for aeration. When the compost is ready, they need to remove it, apply it to the soil, and all these things. And also it's important, like for composting to be successful, the organisms in the heap, the worms, but also other organisms, they need the right circumstances to work in, otherwise they will not be productive or leave the heap or even die. So this also means that in a way, composting is a relational achievement. And this is something many authors that have written about composting also have noted. So in composting, humans kind of facilitate non-human living and laboring by building, maintaining, and caring for compost heaps and inhabitant workers. And the non-humans break down, decompose, recompose, and transform the discarded materials into a valuable resource for nourishing plant life. So on the human side of things, this also means that successful composting encompasses processes of learning to live with and care for compost beings. So quite a lot of time and effort and energy also goes into just learning how to do composting well, and which material to use and not use, and all of that. So what I noticed from talking to people and seeing people around compost is that, especially from all the organisms in the heap, especially earthworms became valued members of the kind of more than human farming households. And people also talked about it, that they deserve to be cared for like other human and non-human members of the household. So through regular interactions with compost, compost worms became part of people's everyday living with non-human others and caring for non-human others. And it was very notable actually that this manifested mostly through food. So several people mentioned that they made an effort of giving worms sweet food like banana peels, melon, because they were thought to like sweet food. And also people prepared the compost material so they would be soft and easy to digest. So one lady, she first soaked cardboard in water before giving it to the worms because she thought it might be easier to chew for the worms. Another woman told the story that she and her family had almost eaten no watermelon in the past summer because she explained that because the worms liked it so much, she kept just giving the watermelon to the worms instead of to her family. This woman also had added a chili pepper to the compost heap once. I think it was like chili peppers from the kind of winter salad or something. And then she explained that she was super worried that the worms might have burned their eyes as a result of eating the chili peppers because it was so spicy. So she was like stressing for a couple of days before she was sure that the worms were okay and hadn't died as a result of burning their eyes, which is also funny because actually worms do not have eyes. So it also shows how people are kind of thinking and imagining how worms are living in this heap and also connecting it to human experiences, actually. Also, in addition to thinking about food, people worried about the heap becoming too hot or too cold or too wet or too dry. Also, they worried about their chickens that they would disturb the heap and eat the worms. So one person also said, when I open my eyes in the morning, the first thing I think about are the worms and whether the chickens didn't touch them. When I leave home and come back, I ask my family, did you water them? How are they? So it really shows how, for some people at least, these worms are really like on their minds all day. I also noticed when people met each other, that they often discuss the well-being of each other's worms. So when someone came in, they were sitting there chatting, they asked like, oh, how are your worms? And then people often answered saying something about how they were growing well or multiplying well, because they saw this as a sign of the worms being fed well. And also in the sense of kind of community building around worms, there was one occasion where one lady kind of finished preparing the compost heap so the worms could be introduced. And then two of her group mates came to share their worms. So they brought the worms, one in a box and the other one in a bag, I think. And then a few other people were there as well, actually, just to kind of be part of this joyful occasion. So they really made an event of it together. This was outside the seminar, so just the participants together. So if we take a moment to look back on the project's reason to promote biohumus, we can conclude that the aim of enriching the soil and in that way increase agricultural productivity in a way that's environmentally clean was indeed achieved. And also as a result, several participants improved their subsistence food supply, and some even managed to sell some of their surplus produce and compost worms. I would argue, however, that the effects of composting also extend beyond this kind of notion of productivity alone. So first of all, like I mentioned, vermicomposting not only transforms discarded materials into resources, resources for life and livelihoods, but it also transforms smallholders' experiences and perspectives of their own lives and of other organisms' life. So working with biohumus and also seeing the earth come to life made people care more about the health of the soil, and also to realize that lacking soils are a result of lacking care. And this was not, I think, per se an aim of the projects. I mean, not that they were against it, but it was not the main aim, I think. Also seeing the land as a living organism made them think about worms and the soil in terms of reciprocity. So several people mentioned that when you cooperate with and care for biohumus in the soil, they will also reciprocate by providing a good harvest. I also mentioned that when composting generates abundance, this abundance is often used to sustain reciprocal relationships and moral economies through sharing with guests, neighbors, family members, or people in need. So I would say that this enthusiasm for biohumus is entangled with increasing more than human capacities for supporting and generating life. And it is this also about thriving together with fellow humans, but also with other organisms. So this shows that increasing productivity through vermicomposting does not follow a capitalist logic of accumulation and financial gain, but instead compost's priorities lies with meeting needs and creating sufficiency for their families, but also for the wider human community, for composting organisms, and for plants. So in short, it is about making a living by fostering life. So to conclude, I don't wish to suggest that composting is kind of a panacea for all the world's problems, even though I'm quite enthusiastic about it myself as well. But I do think that people's enthusiasm shows that kind of notions of improvement or development, they do not have to be high tech, and also that experiences of improvement can come from livelihoods enriched through relationality, care, reciprocity, and those kind of things, instead of only monetary income. So I would also suggest that even though vermicomposting in these cases, but I guess in general, was not necessarily intentionally political or subversive, I still think it holds transformative potential, and political potential also, because it provides an alternative to modernist notions of development and also capitalist structures of resource creation and ownership, which, as we know, are often destructive in many different ways. So the transformative alternative that composting offered, I think, is to instead emphasize and value mutuality more than human mutuality, and commons thinking as a way forward into the future. I will end there. Thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to your questions. I also I didn't mention any references, but I, of course, draw from other people, so I put them on this slide, which I guess we can also share somehow.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Simone. That was really interesting. So if you allow, I will now start with the discussion. So what I will